Sorry, Chen. Humble thinker beat you. Tim Gore, I understand your predicament. I have a wife and family, and a man's got to eat. So, Tim Gore, I'm going to help you out this week. 2,000 Pine Points to Tim Gore. Hopefully that puts some food on the table. How the author of the Gospel of Luke messed up the parable of the talents. It was a Christian who reminded me of this parable and how bad it is, and how the author messed up. Whoever the author of the Gospel of Luke was, it's probably not a guy named Luke. He used Matthew to write a parable. He used Matthew as his source material, but he got it all wrong. Not all wrong, but most of it wrong. And I'm going to show you how he got wrong. And then in both parables of the talents and the minas in Matthew and Luke, the ending is atrocious. I mean, it's terrible because it's obvious it's a parable about Jesus, and Jesus ends up like taking pleasure in the slaughter of his enemies. So now, of course, if you're a Christian watching and you don't like me, you're not going to listen to anything I say. But you might listen to a guy named Mike Licona who reminded me of this. And so let's take a listen to what Mike Licona has to say about this parable, and then I'll talk about it.
Now, we lastly covered editorial fatigue, an intriguing observation.
So what I call just being a bad historian, being a bad author, this guy's talking about editorial fatigue.
And we had a couple examples there, and since our last time together, you've thought of another example that you wanted to share of editorial fatigue.
Yeah. So, like, for example, we talked about the parable of the talents, which appears in Matthew, whereas it's the parable of the minas in Luke. And while certainly we can expect that Jesus would have told the same parable on different occasions, and could even mix it up and change some of the details to adapt it to his audience, no problem with that. But in this case, it seems that there are clues in Luke's version that strongly suggest that he is familiar either with Matthew or he's familiar with the same parable that Matthew records.
Okay, here's Mike Licona admitting that Luke is familiar with what Matthew's recording. He either has Matthew open in front of him or has read Matthew before. Now, keep in mind, in today's day and age, and I know this is not fair, but in today's era, if an author borrows or takes or quotes another author and doesn't tell you, that's plagiarism. There's copyright rules. That's just bad. It's unethical. But back then, for some reason, authors got away with it, and they did it. And so the author of the Gospel of Luke took stuff from Matthew and Mark, but in this case Matthew, and didn't tell anybody, saying, "Hey, by the way, I got this parable from the author of Matthew."
Because Luke's math is off. Matthew, you've got the one guy, the one servant.
Here's a Christian historian saying that the author of Luke's math is off. Now, to a lot of Christians, that doesn't mean much, but for those really conservative fundamentalist type, the Bible's inerrant. To hear a Christian New Testament historian say that an inspired author of the New Testament had his math wrong is maybe not a deal breaker by any sense of the word, but it's a little disconcerting.
He had 5 talents and he earned 5 more, so he's got 10, right? And so the king orders that the 1 talent taken away from the lazy guy who buried it be given to the guy with 10 talents. Well, in Luke's version, the guy that earns the most had 1 mina and he earned 10 more, which makes 11. So at the end, the guy says, take it away, take the mina away from that lazy guy and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Well, in that parable, no one has 10 minas. The guy has 11. The one that has 10 is in Matthew's gospel. So that's one of the 2 things that would suggest that there's some sort of a dependence, a common source, or that Luke is familiar with either Matthew's source or Matthew himself, what Matthew has written.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there, and I want to break this down because I find this fascinating, and I want to actually read some of those parables to you, and let's see if I can do this. Now, I am not apologia. I don't have fancy graphics. If you want that type of fancy graphics, then leave my channel and go to Apologia's channel. But what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to get rid of myself. So here's Matthew and Luke. This is not going to work. Let's see. Oh, maybe it will work. Okay. What is it? It's Matthew 25. This is going to be really messy. 14 to 30. And it's a parable about talents. Talents means money, basically. And it's a parable about 3 guys. Guy 1, guy 2, guy 3. And there's a very important master, king, leader, however you want to view it. And this very important leader, king, master, gives this first guy 5 talents or $5, whatever you want to say. Gives the second guy 2. Gives the third guy $1. Then this master, this king, he leaves for a while, goes on a journey, leaves these 3 alone to invest the talents that he gave them. Now the first guy, he does really well. He earns 5 more talents. The second guy, he earns 2 more. The third guy earns none. He ends up burying his 1 talent or keeping it safe because he's a little bit scared of this master, and he's scared to lose it. Because if he loses it, it's game over. Okay, so let's see how these guys did. The master comes back and says, "How did you do, servant number 1?" He says, "Well, I took your 5 and I made 5 more, so now I have 10. Second guy said, "Hey, I took your 2, master, and I made 2 more, so now I have 4. And then the third guy says, "Oh, I was scared of you, and I didn't want to lose this 1, so I just buried it, and so now I only have 1. Now this master, who's supposed to be Jesus in the story, in the parable, says, "You terrible, no good, rotten, useless servant, I'm going to take that 1 talent that I gave you, and because you didn't make any money for me, didn't invest it, I'm going to give it to the guy who has the most, who has 10. And then, get this, at the end, it says, let's see, Matthew 25, verse 30. Let's go to 29. "For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not," this poor schmuck at the end here, "who has not, even what he has will be taken away." Now, keep in mind, this is about Jesus. Jesus is saying, this poor guy who's poor, I'm going to even take away the last mina he has, or the last talent he has. "And cast that worthless servant into the outer darkness." This is verse 30. "In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth," Jesus said. Okay, so that's the nice parable of the talents in Matthew. Now, here we have what a lot of Christians say is the best, one of the best historians in the New Testament, named Luke. And in Luke 19, verses 12 and 27, he also tells a story a parable that Jesus said, purportedly said. But of course, he doesn't mention where he gets this information from. He doesn't actually say he was there himself to hear it. He doesn't even mention that he could have got it from a guy named Matthew. But he tells this parable, and he says that he calls, I have it here in verse 13, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then return. It kind of sounds like Jesus being a king, going up to heaven and then promising his return. Verse 13, so he called 10 servants and gave them $10 each, or minas, they call them, mina. 10, he called 10. Not 3, he called 10. Well, maybe this is a different parable, so let's keep reading. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we don't want this man to be our king. Kind of sounds like those Pharisees saying, we don't want Jesus to be king. But but the man was made king, however, and returned home. And then he sent for the servants to whom he had given money. Okay. Now, he says to the first one, now remember, he called 10 servants. He says to the first one, I gave you 1. And how much did you earn? And the guy says, I earned 10 more. So now this guy has 11. Now to the second servant, remember he gave 10 servants 1 each. Let's just call it $1. And he says, how much did you earn? And he goes, well, I earned 5 more. So now I have 6. And then the third servant says, well, I didn't earn anything. Sorry, I just hid it. I hid my one under a towel or something like that, under a piece of cloth, because I knew you were a hard man and I was afraid of you. So then basically he has 1. Now the master got really upset, and he says, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. He's talking about the poor guy here. He's saying, I'm going to judge you. And why didn't you put the money in the bank, and at least so I could get some interest? And so the master says, take the 1 talent. Now get this. Take the 1 talent and give it to the guy who has 10. There's nobody here who has 10. There's a guy who has 11. But this is what Mike Licona is saying. It's obvious that the author of Luke is thinking about the parable in Matthew, because in Matthew the guy has 10, but in Luke the guy has 11. So it's obvious that Luke is borrowing from Matthew, not telling anybody he's borrowing from Matthew, and then screwing it up. He starts with 10 servants, but then ends up only talking about 3, which is what Matthew did. He says, take the 1 talent from the guy who didn't make any return on the investment and give it to the guy who was 10, but it's actually 11. But he's probably thinking of Matthew, and Matthew had the guy who has 10. And then get this. This is the very end. And this is the kicker. This, not only that the fact that the author of Luke is a horrible historian, a horrible author, and just botched up this parable badly. In verse 26, he says, now this is the master speaking within the parable. I tell you that everyone who has, more will be given, but as for the one who has nothing, even that will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. Now remember, this is basically a story, a parable about Jesus giving gifts to and talents and responsibilities to those who he leaves behind when he leaves and before he comes back. And he says, basically, if you don't get a return on investment on the talents that I've given you, on the gifts that I've given you, that the gifts that I do give you, that will be taken away from you. And those enemies, like those Pharisees, bring them in front of me. I want to watch them die. Now, I dare any Christian listening, any pastor or historian, are you going to try to weasel out of this and say that that this is not really talking about Jesus? Because I know you want to. I know you really want to say this is not about Jesus. But it sure looks like it, doesn't it? And if so, like, does that bother you at all? You know, this is PineCreek, appeal to emotion right now. But does it bother you that Jesus is talking about himself in this parable, according to the story, about wanting to watch people die in front of him who have betrayed him, and wanting to cast people into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, as it says in Matthew? And he's talking about the ones who are the poorest in the story. And should you be confident? Like, I realize these are just parables and stories, but should you be confident of any author, no matter if it's today or 2,000 years ago, who doesn't tell you his sources, doesn't critique his sources, who makes these types of mistakes? Does he not have a proofreader? Like, if he makes these types of mistakes, what other mistakes has he made? These are the things I believe most Christians don't even know. And so I want to take my hat off to guys like Mike Licona for even reminding Christians of this. Now, for guys like Mike Licona, none of this matters. I mean, he's a Christian, and he admits that the author of Luke made a mistake here, that it sure looks like he made a mistake here. He probably is even somehow comfortable with the idea of this judgment of whoever's been given little. If they don't do anything, even that will be taken away from them. He's probably even comfortable with the idea of Jesus wanting to watch the death of his enemies. Because for guys like Michael Licona, he believes because he's experienced some type of miracle, or he's heard of testimonies of people who have experienced miracles. The flying trash can lid. Remember that story? If his debate with Airman, he mentioned that the flying trash can, and it's like these are his friends, they told him the story, so he believes that's what happened. And then he mentioned that there was other stories that he didn't mention that I think are the real reasons he believes. In fact, if you go on his channel, he recently posted, let me see if I can find it. He recently posted a testimony of one of his former students. And it was like, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's called Near-Death Experiences, an Unexpected Conversation with Jesus. Yeah. From an elderly lady, I think, who used to take one of his classes. And he posted this to his YouTube channel as evidence. I think it's stuff like this that he is the real reason why he believes. But I watched it. Do I dare show this? No, it's so embarrassing. I won't do it to the poor lady. But so when you're talking to Christians about these sort of things, you got to remember that there are reasons outside of the text of the Bible. There are reasons outside what they would present as evidence for why they really believe this stuff. And I think these reasons are horrible, terrible. Because the video I made yesterday with the Mormon guy, these are the same types of things. D.B. Cisco says, Luke isn't making mistakes. It's a deliberate rewriting for an Orthodox community. Well, but D.B. Cisco, you could be right. However, in the beginning of that parable, he talks about 10, calling 10 servants, and then ends up only talking about 3. Now, if this is a parable in the story, why start with 10 and then go to 3? I think he made a mistake. I think it's an actual authorship mistake that he had 10 in his mind, and he should have just gone back and noticed it. If you're going to talk about 10 servants, then you got to have that 10 follow along in the story. But he shifts from 10 to 3. And I think he shifts from 10 to 3 because he had 10 in his mind from the guy who gets more in Matthew, and 3 in his mind because of the 3 guys in Matthew. And he just mixed up the number 10 and 3. So I think actually Mike Licona is correct when he says that I don't think Mike Licona called it editorial fatigue, or maybe he did, but it's just sloppy writing. It's horrible writing. So I want to appeal to different types of Christians here. For the Christians who believe that the Bible is perfect and without error, even in things like parables, that this is God-inspired, God messed up on some math here if he inspired Luke to write this way. So that should cause you to doubt, lower your confidence just a bit. Scotch is my favorite word. Now, for the fundamentalist types, more the liberal type Christians, these parables should bother you for a different reason. That the Jesus that you think is the source of love is the type of Jesus who wants to see his enemies killed in front of him. Is that the type of Jesus you imagine? Is this the type of Jesus that you think completes you as a human being? That by following his leadership, his example, for that type of man to say things like, let me see if I can bring it back up. This guy here, this guy here, the third guy, he's basically calling that this guy should go to hell forever because he didn't use what God gave him. He was entrusted with little. He didn't do anything with it. So for those liberal type Christians watching, is this the type of Jesus you really believe in, love? Jesus that will cast even the poor who have given very little into the fiery pits? So whether you're a very conservative Christian, the parable in Luke should bother you for these really sloppy mistakes. And if you're a little more of a liberal type Christian, this should bother you because of the picture it paints of the one you love and cherish. It really, in any other book, be honest, Christians, in any other book, can I say that word? I'll say this. In any other book, this character's a douche. I was going to say a different word, but I have a clean mouth. Kwahu asks, how do you battle with a person who claims that faith is a supernatural power given from God and you can't understand it if you don't have it? Oh, that's a great question. I would say step 1, don't assume they're wrong. Step 2, say, that sounds amazing. I want that. For me, that would be an honest comment. Like if you're talking that I can have supernatural abilities to do supernatural things, I want that. How can I get it? So then you talk with that person how to get it. Now, if they say, well, you got to go to church for 2 years or whatever, then say, come on, that's not fair. This sounds like Scientology. And then at the very end, I'm going to spend all this money and have nothing. No, how can I get this by this time next week? Then if they say, well, you have to fall on your knees and accept Jesus in your heart and all this, do it. Fall on your knees. Say, look, be honest with them. Say, I don't believe this. I don't believe it's that this God's even real. But this does sound attractive to me. So if what you're saying is true, I'm willing to experiment. So if they ask you to fall on your knees and ask Jesus in your heart, do it. See, a lot of atheists actually won't say stuff like this, but what's wrong? What do you have to lose for experimenting? I've done this with Cy Ten Broonkate. I did it with a guy named, what's his name? Cam. Remember that Roman Catholic? He's like on radio stations all across the United States. You have nothing to lose by experimenting like that. If all you have to do is spend like a couple minutes of your time. The kind of Messiah Luke is portraying made more sense at the time. Yeah, maybe, Karag, maybe. But for the Christians today that I interact with, the liberal ones, the ones who lean more liberal, this parable does not sit right. For the conservative ones, no, it doesn't bother them. It's like, yes, God has got a justice. Let those poor people who have rejected Jesus, let them burn. They're okay with that. How do Christians believe this stuff? Luca, it's very simple. Meaning, purpose, morality, hope. 4 things? What am I missing? Now, a lot of them, like a lot of religions, are indoctrinated. That's just all they know. But then why do they keep with it? Meaning, purpose, morality, hope. Those are the biggies. Community, but you can get community in other ways too. Thanks, Jerry, for the Wayne Gretzky donation. Rob says, when I was a Christian, the Bible was secondary to what my mom said Jesus meant when I was 4 years old. The Bible was secondary to what my mom said Jesus meant when I was 4 years old. Yeah, you're welcome, Kwahu. Seriously, like, it will be kind of fun, like if you try that route with a Christian, because especially if they know you're a non-believer, if you're an atheist, they won't expect that. 5th thing might be a personal relationship. Frozen Sea, I think you're right, but the personal relationship is how they get their meaning and purpose and so forth. Like a lot of Christians just, if you'll hear them say the word nihilism, that they don't want to be a nihilist, or that the logical conclusion of atheism is becoming a nihilist. That points to their core fears. Thank you, DB Cisco, for the donation. With the voice of Nixel in your head, you can't understand anything. Andrews asks, how do you respond to people that say you're not sincere enough when you respond to them about how you tried the Holy Spirit? Oh, Andrew, it's a great question. I would ask them, how can you become more sincere? How can you force yourself to become more sincere? Ask them for step-by-step instructions to stop suppressing, to stop being insincere. Like, have them hold your hand and walk you through it. Like, I honestly think it's totally okay for every atheist to accept Jesus into their heart as an experiment to Christians. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go to church. Like, if they start saying, well, if you're a true Christian, you have to do the X, Y, and Z, then you say, okay, then I'm out. Because all you said is all I have to do is accept Jesus in my heart and believe, but I don't believe. So I accept Jesus in my heart. I just said the words. So the thing is, you cannot convince yourself to believe this. So this is the real problem that Christians have to face, is that they say these things, all you have to do is X, but really it's not that simple. It was a rhetorical question. What's the difference between meaning and purpose? Not much, I guess, but so Christians would say, or most theists would say, that the purpose of life is to serve your Creator, to be all that God has made you to be. That's your purpose. The meaning of life is to worship God. So there's not, it's a good question. I don't think there's much difference. Yeah, you're right, Darkin. I think it was you talked about value. Tithing is a hard pass. Yeah, see, when I was challenge to ask for the gift of faith, I think it was, from one pastor. He was a Roman Catholic guy. I just knew, I could see it coming. It's like, you have to now, after you pray for that, you have to spend a lot of time studying the word. It's very much like Scientology. Like if you gotta do a whole bunch of stuff to convince yourself that that's true and that you actually believe it. Now, I think if you're going to witness, Christians, if you care about results, which I think deep down you do, but you're not supposed to. If you care about results, you want to, this sounds horrible, but you want to target those who are hurting, target those people who are desperate, target those people who are going through divorce, bankruptcy, addictions. If you want to convert them to Jesus, that's what you have to do. Fear, Emily says, fear also keeps them in. That's what it was for me, and it was it was damaging. Yes. So the way to get people into Christianity, besides being born and raised in it, stress heaven, stress miracles, stress all the good stuff, and also stress all the bad stuff. If you don't believe, you'll go to hell. One of the first steps for a fundamentalist to leave Christianity is to somehow be willing to go to hell. Now that's a tough sell. I mean, because they're not going to stop believing in hell right away, but just to get them say, you know what, I value truth more than hell, pain, so I'm willing to go to hell if I'm wrong. And then once that they can do that, they can start to see the evidence objectively, in my opinion. And once you can put aside, you can shelf your love for Jesus and shelf your fear of hell, and then you can start seeing, oh, this prophecy really is not a prophecy. If God can't bribe you or guilt you, he'll threaten you to get what he wants. Yeah, Christianity, the conservative fundamentalist version of it anyhow, is horrible. And the liberal version of it, like even guys like Pete Enns or liberal Christians, I think they use it for just to have some gravitas, some oomph behind certain social policies. Like if you're a believer in pacifism, Jesus really was a pacifist, so maybe you should be a pacifist too. If you are a pretty hardcore socialist, Jesus was a socialist, so maybe you should be too. So I think a lot of Christians use Jesus to help their social or political goals. Now, a lot of people even the liberal Christians still will believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and I just think that's based on horrible epistemology because they base it on some experience they've had personally. So I'd be curious to know, I know there's a few pastors who watch my channel regularly. So for the pastors who got this far, let me know either privately or in the comment section if, number one, you see this mistake that Mike Licona saw, and I'm talking about with Luke. Do you admit that Luke borrowed from Matthew? Okay, let me make this formal. Questions for Christians. 1, do you admit that Luke copied from Matthew? Number 2, do you believe that Luke made a mistake when he copied from Matthew? Number 3, do you admit that this parable in Matthew 25 and Luke 19, that these parables are talking about Jesus? Number 4, if they are talking about Jesus, do you admit that it really makes Jesus look like a douche? I have not tweeted him again. I should. make an effort after this live stream's over to get a hold of him. What do I think Jesus would do about guns, Doug? Well, according to this parable, Jesus' position on guns would be to buy a whole bunch of them and kill these guys who made nothing. Line them up, get a gun, a whole bunch of guns, and just for the guys who made no talents or minas. So Jesus, is pro killing people who don't make a return on his investment. I think Jesus would be an NRA when it comes to people who don't use what he's given them effectively. Yeah, I like Quake Q as well. But his epistemology is horrible. Terrible. Qualu, you are valuable to me. 1,000 pine points. That has value. You spelled it right, Brenda. I think you spelled it right. Quaku, yeah. Oh, just Google that, correct? That's funny, blue collar. Darken. I was on for 2.5 hours yesterday. I gotta make this a short one. Plus, that's all I have. Plus, it's the weekend. Plus, you gotta have them always want more. Who am I going to apologize to? I'm going to apologize to Jesus. Jesus, I'm sorry. If you did exist 2,000 years ago, I apologize that so many authors messed up your reputation. Have a great weekend, guys. Remember, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.